Most people try to fix their garden by adding something: a stronger fertilizer, a better brand, a new product that promises faster growth. It feels logical. You see weak plants, so you feed them more. I used to do the same. But over time, something strange starts to happen. The soil doesn't improve. The plants respond, but only for a while. And each season, you find yourself buying more just to get the same result. That's the part no one really explains. You're not building soil. You're maintaining a dependency. Most home gardeners are taught to think this way: feed the plant, add nutrients, fix the surface problem. But soil doesn't work like that. Soil is not a container. It's a living system. And when that system is missing, no amount of fertilizer really fixes it. You might get growth, but you don't get stability. You don't get resilience. You don't get that quiet confidence that your garden will keep working season after season. Instead, you get a cycle: buy, apply, wait, repeat. And slowly, without realizing it, the soil becomes more tired, not less. Here's the part most people overlook. In nature, nothing is added in bottles. There are no fertilizers in a forest, no irrigation systems in wild fields. Yet everything grows, strong, consistent, year after year. So the question becomes simple: what are we missing? The answer is not a product, it's a process. A small, quiet system that most people ignore because it doesn't look impressive at first. It doesn't come in packaging. It doesn't promise instant results, but it has been quietly working for thousands of years. Even rulers understood its value. Cleopatra once protected it as a national resource. Not gold, not grain, something much smaller and much easier to overlook. Today, you can recreate that same system in a simple box. You don't need land, you don't need experience, and you don't need to spend much at all. But before we get there, you need to see one thing clearly. It's not that your garden failed, it's that you were taught to focus on the wrong thing. Once you start looking at it this way, things begin to make more sense. Most gardeners are not failing because they lack effort. They're following a model that was never designed for long-term stability. You're told to feed the plant, so you do. You add nutrients from the outside. You try to correct every visible problem, but each of those actions treats the symptom, not the system. Over time, this creates a quiet pattern. The soil becomes less active. Water drains differently. Nutrients don't hold the way they used to. And without realizing it, you start depending on inputs just to maintain normal growth. I've seen this happen in small backyard beds and larger gardens alike. The more you rely on external products, the less the soil does on its own. It's subtle at first. You don't notice it in a single season. But after a few cycles, the difference is clear. Healthy soil should support plants. Instead, the plants start depending on you. That's the shift. And it doesn't come from doing something wrong. It comes from being taught the wrong starting point. You were shown how to add nutrients, but not how to build the system that holds them. In natural soil, nutrients are not just present. They are constantly being created, transformed, and recycled. There is movement, there is life, there is balance. When that system is active, the soil feeds itself. When it's missing, you have to replace it manually. That's why many gardens feel like work instead of something stable. You're carrying the load that the soil should be carrying. And once you see that, the goal changes. It's no longer about finding a better fertilizer. It's about restoring the process that makes fertilizer unnecessary. This is where most people expect something complicated: a new technique, a detailed formula, something technical. But the truth is much simpler. The system has already been solved. It has been working quietly for centuries. Even careful observers like Charles Darwin spent years watching it, not because it was complex, but because it was easy to overlook. What he saw was not a trick. It was a cycle: waste going in, life working in between, fertility coming out. And once you understand that cycle, you don't need to chase products anymore. You just need to rebuild the process. That's where we're going next. The shift begins when you stop thinking in terms of inputs and start thinking in terms of systems. Not what you add, but what you allow to happen. There is a simple method that brings this back into place. It doesn't rely on chemicals. It doesn't depend on brands. And it doesn't require much space. It's called vermicomposting. At first, it sounds technical, but in practice, it's one of the most natural systems you can set up. You're not creating anything new. You're restoring something that already exists in healthy soil. Organic matter goes in, life processes it, stable fertility comes out. The key part of that system is small, quiet, easy to ignore. Worms. Not just any worms, but a specific group that thrives in organic material. They don't dig deep like fieldworms. They stay near the surface where food is constantly breaking down. They eat what you would normally throw away. Vegetable scraps, fruit peels, coffee grounds. And as they move through that material, something changes. The waste becomes stable. The nutrients become available. The structure becomes soft and balanced. What comes out the other side is not raw compost. It's something more refined. Worm castings. If you hold it in your hand, it doesn't feel like waste. It feels like finished soil. Dark, fine, and slightly moist. No sharp smell, no rough texture. Just quiet, steady fertility. This is what older farming systems depended on without always naming it directly. Even in ancient times, people noticed that the most productive land was always full of this kind of activity. That's why figures like Cleopatra placed real value on protecting soil life. They didn't talk about nutrients the way we do today. They focused on conditions. If the conditions were right, the system worked. Centuries later, observers like Charles Darwin came to the same conclusion in a different way. Not by controlling the system, but by watching it, slowly, patiently. He noticed that worms were constantly reshaping the soil, not in dramatic ways, but in small, continuous actions. And over time, those small actions added up. Layer by layer, the soil improved. Not because something was added from the outside, but because the system inside never stopped working. That's the idea you're building here. Not a shortcut, not a quick fix. A small, reliable process that runs in the background. You give it simple inputs, and it gives you something stable in return. Once you see it that way, it stops feeling complicated. It becomes something you can actually manage, even in a small space. That's where the next step comes in, setting it up in a way that works quietly, without taking over your time. Once you understand the idea, the setup becomes surprisingly simple. You don't need a large space. You don't need specialized equipment, and you don't need to get everything perfect. You're building a small system, not a machine. I usually tell people to start with something basic. A styrofoam box works well, the kind you can find at a local market for a couple of dollars. It's light, easy to handle, and it holds moisture without much effort. That's enough. You make a few small holes along the sides and the bottom, not too many, just enough for air to move and for excess moisture to escape. Air matters more than people think. Without it, the system slows down. With it, everything stays balanced. Inside the box, you don't start with food, you start with bedding. This is where most people rush, and it's one of the reasons their system struggles early on. The worms don't need a pile of scraps right away. They need a stable place to live. So you use simple materials, moist paper, cardboard, anything that can hold water without becoming compacted. You dampen it until it feels like a wrung-out cloth. Not dry, not dripping, just slightly moist. That becomes the base. Then you add the worms. A small handful is enough to begin. The species most people use is Eisenia fetida. They stay near the surface and work through organic matter efficiently. You don't need many at the start. They multiply on their own once the conditions are right. After that, you begin feeding, slowly. This is not a place to dump all your kitchen waste at once. You add small amounts, a layer of vegetable scraps, fruit peels, maybe some coffee grounds. Then you cover it lightly with bedding. That covering step is simple, but it makes a difference. It keeps moisture in, it reduces smell, and it helps the system stay calm, because that's what you want. A calm system, no strong odors, no sudden changes, no effort to manage every detail. You check it every few days. If it looks dry, you add a little water. If it looks too wet, you add more dry paper. If food remains untouched, you slow down feeding. There's no strict schedule. You're not controlling the system, you're observing it. And over time, you begin to notice something. The material starts to change. Edges soften, colors darken. The volume slowly reduces. The worms move through it quietly, doing what they have always done. No noise, no rush, just steady transformation. This is where many people expect complexity, but there isn't any. It's a container, a bit of moisture, some organic matter, and time. That's all the system needs. And once it settles, it becomes part of your routine without effort. You add scraps, you close the lid, and the process continues on its own. Nothing flashy, but it works. At the beginning, it feels like nothing is happening. You open the box after a few days and the scraps are still there. The shape is the same. The colors haven't changed much. It can make you wonder if the system is working at all. That's normal. This process doesn't move fast on the surface. It moves quietly underneath. Around the second or third week, you start to notice small changes. The edges of the vegetable scraps soften. The brighter colors fade into darker tones. The material begins to lose its original shape. It's subtle. If you're not paying attention, you might miss it. But the system is starting to settle. The worms move through the bedding and the food, not in a straight line, not all at once. They work in small pockets, breaking things down gradually. As they pass through, the material changes form. Not just smaller, different. By the fourth or fifth week, the texture becomes more consistent. You won't see as many distinct pieces of food. Instead, you'll see something that looks more like damp soil. This is where the shift becomes clear. What you added as waste is no longer recognizable, and the smell changes too. At the start, there might be a faint scent from the food. Nothing strong but noticeable. Over time, that fades. What replaces it is something much softer. A mild, earthy smell. The kind you notice after rain. That's usually a good sign. It means the system is balanced. Moisture, air, and organic matter are working together instead of competing. By the time you reach around 60 days, the bottom layer of the box begins to look different from the top. The top still holds newer material. The bottom holds something finished. Dark, fine, even. If you take a small handful, it falls apart easily. No clumps, no sharp edges, no trace of what it used to be. This is the point most people remember, because it doesn't feel like compost anymore. It feels like soil that's ready to be used. And there's a quiet moment when you realize what happened. You didn't process the waste. You didn't mix or turn or manage it constantly. You set the conditions and let the system do the rest. That's an important difference. Because once you see it happen once, you stop questioning whether it works. You begin to trust the process. From that point on, the timing becomes familiar. You know roughly how long it takes. You recognize the signs. You adjust without thinking too much about it, and the system becomes predictable. Not fast, but steady. And in gardening, steady is what lasts. Once you reach that point, the question changes. It's no longer about whether the system works, it's about what it actually gives you. Because what you're holding in your hand is not just compost. It's a form of fertility that behaves differently from anything you buy in a bag. Worm castings don't act like a quick boost. They don't push fast growth for a short period and then disappear. They settle into the soil. They hold nutrients in a stable form. And more importantly, they carry life with them. That part is easy to overlook. Most fertilizers focus on numbers: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. But soil doesn't function on numbers alone. It functions on activity. Worm castings contain a dense population of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, and other small life forms that continue working after you apply them. They don't just feed the plant, they support the system around the plant. That means nutrients are released slowly. Water is held more evenly. Roots move more easily through the soil. You're not forcing growth, you're allowing it. There's also a practical side to this. If you've been buying organic fertilizers, you already know the cost adds up. A few bags each season, maybe more if the soil needs improvement. Over time, it becomes a regular expense. With this system, that pattern changes. The input cost stays low. A box, some bedding, occasional food scraps that you would have thrown away anyway. And the output continues, not in large, sudden quantities, but in a steady flow. That's what makes it useful. You're not depending on a product that runs out. You're maintaining a process that keeps producing. Some people take it a step further and make what's often called vermicompost tea. It's a simple extraction. Water passing through finished castings, carrying microorganisms and soluble nutrients with it. Used properly, it can support plant health in a more immediate way. But even without that step, the castings themselves are enough for most home gardens. Mixed into soil, added around plants, or used when starting new beds. It doesn't require precision, it doesn't require exact measurements, because it works within a range, not at a fixed point. That flexibility matters. It means you don't have to worry about getting everything perfect. You apply it, observe, and adjust over time. And as the system continues, something else becomes clear. You're no longer reacting to problems as often. The soil becomes more consistent. Watering becomes easier to manage. Plants respond without needing constant correction. That doesn't mean everything becomes perfect, but it becomes more stable. And stability is what reduces effort over time. You spend less energy fixing issues because fewer issues appear in the first place. That's the real value, not just saving money, but reducing dependence. After a few cycles, something shifts that's harder to measure. It's not just the soil, it's how you relate to your garden. At the beginning, most of your attention goes into fixing things. You watch for signs of deficiency. You adjust feeding. You respond to problems as they show up. There's always a sense that something might go wrong. But when the system underneath becomes stable, that feeling starts to fade. You still pay attention. You still observe. But you're not reacting all the time. The soil begins to carry more of the work. It holds moisture longer, so watering becomes less frequent. It supports root growth more evenly, so plants establish faster. And over time, you notice that each new planting feels easier than the last. Not because you're doing more, but because the system is doing more for you. This is where the long-term value becomes clear. You're not just producing compost, you're building a cycle that continues on its own. Kitchen scraps move into the box. The box produces castings. The castings return to the soil, and the soil becomes more capable each season. That loop is simple, but it changes everything. It reduces waste in your home. It reduces what you need to buy. And it gives you a level of consistency that's hard to get from products alone. Even in a small space, the effect adds up. A few containers can support a raised bed. A small backyard system can support multiple planting areas. And because the process runs continuously, you're not waiting for one large batch. You're working with a steady supply. That's what makes it practical for everyday use. It fits into a routine. You cook, you save scraps, you add them to the system. No extra trips, no special schedule. Just a small adjustment to what you're already doing. Over time, it becomes part of how your household works. And there's a quiet sense of independence that comes with that. You're less affected by price changes, less dependent on availability, less concerned about running out of inputs. Not completely independent, but more stable. And that stability carries beyond the garden. It affects how you plan, how you use resources, how you think about growing food over the long term. It becomes less about maximizing output in a single season and more about maintaining something that keeps working year after year. That's the direction this system leads, not toward complexity, but towards something simpler and more reliable. At this point, there's nothing left to prove. You've seen how the system works, you've watched the change happen over time, and you understand that it doesn't depend on perfect conditions, it depends on consistency. That's why there's no need to expand too quickly. You don't need multiple boxes, you don't need to scale it into something larger. Start with one, place it somewhere convenient, add scraps as they come, check it from time to time, let it become familiar. Because the real value of this method is not in how much you produce at the beginning, it's in how steady it becomes over time. Once you trust the process, you can decide how far to take it. You might keep it small, just enough to support a few plants, or you might expand gradually, adding another container, then another, until it supports most of your garden. There's no fixed path, only what fits your space, your time, and your needs, and that's an important part of it. This system adapts to you, not the other way around. If a week goes by and you don't check it, it continues. If you add less, it slows down naturally. If you add more, it responds over time. It doesn't demand attention, It rewards observation, and that changes how gardening feels. Less pressure, less urgency, more understanding. You begin to notice patterns instead of reacting to problems. You learn what the system needs without forcing it. And over time, that builds confidence. Not from following instructions, but from seeing results with your own eyes. That's usually when people realize something simple. This was never about compost. It was about control. Not control over nature, but control over your dependence on things outside your reach. A small system running quietly in the background, giving you something reliable. That's enough. So if you're going to try it, keep it simple. Start with one box, use what you already have. Watch what happens, and let the system teach you the rest.